Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the numbers around mass immigration to the West. There are a lot of things that don't really add up. Huge numbers of people are coming into the West, Australia, Canada, the United States, and so on. This is all being done without the consent of the people that are already living in the West, and the huge infrastructure and logistics machine that is employed with billions, gazillions of dollars being spent on it, instrumental, if not pivotal, in moving this many people from the third world peasant economies into the West. These are people that would never attempt this sort of journey, never attempt it, wouldn't dream of attempting it if they didn't have so much encouragement and support and access to sophisticated logistics to be able to do it. Armies of lawyers protecting them and so on and so forth. So, as well as, by the way, also armies of treacherous people in the Western countries who are busily, actively, gleefully, joyously, and getting rich out of it too, selling out their fellow citizens to these illiterate third world black and brown peasants that the globalists have ordained will be moved from the surplus populations of the world into the West. Now, there are a few things that I guess we need to look at. Where do all these people go and what do they do? We're talking hundreds of thousands of illiterate peasants, illiterate in their own language, let alone any Western language. And I'll use English just as the example. I mean, I could use French or German, I suppose, but just using English as the example, given it's more widely spoken in the West. We find that the majority of people certainly coming to Australia who are black and brown are typically can't speak a word of English or next to nothing, and even after having been here for 10, 15, 20 years, still can't speak a word of English. So we've got these masses of people that are illiterate in their own language, have no skills, no qualifications, nothing at all, yet they're coming in large numbers. The next thing is they're moving into ghettos, and now entire sections of, for example, Sydney and Melbourne, Australia's two biggest cities, you can travel, say on a train, and I don't take the trains that much, but out along Western Sydney, which is where the less expensive real estate is. So if you travel, say, from I guess there's about 30 odd train stops to go out to like the furthest sort of Western train sort of main train station, and 20 of those you're lucky to see a single white person on the train platform. And also there are congregations, like in a certain number of train stations, you'll only see Indians, for example, people from the subcontinent. Others you'll see only Chinese, and so on. But again, there are stations train stations in Sydney where you're lucky if you see one Anglo-Saxon person, and that just gives you an idea of the scale of how things have changed in just on 20 years. Now, the government says, Western governments was, there's only a few, only a handful. What's your problem? There's only a couple of people. Gee whiz, what's your problem, you damn fucking Nazi racist? But of course, that's simply not true. Now, whether they're brought in as direct immigrants or they're students that are then given citizenship or refugees. I mean, it doesn't matter how it's done, through what backdoor and underhanded means, but it's being done. Now, I guess for someone that's done decades of international business travel and done business all over the world in multiple languages, I'm sort of pretty open-minded on these things, but there are a number of concerns. I don't think the government should be lying to us, and I think these things should be done with the consent of the people. So therefore, the mass immigration is just completely illegitimate in my view, because it was not done with the consent of the people, and that's I think a critical thing. Now it's clear that the government knows they would never have got the consent of the people, so why bother? If we can't get what we want, we'll just do it through underhanded, deceitful and treacherous means. Now at that point, the Western governments had abandoned democracy. The idea of the vote and the people decide, they'd abandoned it at that point. That was the point at which they completely abandoned it. And we'll do whatever we want, and we'll just bypass the democratic process to do it. And of course, this was equally the time at which the globalists had taken control of pretty much all the bodies politic around the Western world, as they all embraced this mass immigration at the same time. Now, again, I wouldn't mind so much if the immigration was the doctors, the engineers, and the scientists, but it's not. A tiny proportion of the people coming over as migrants have any skills at all that are useful, and even the ones that have skills, like somebody says they were a procurement purchasing officer at their family business out in the middle of fucking nowhere in India or somewhere. That's not a skill. That's from you're from a third world shithole working in a monopoly where standards and accountability and all this sort of thing is zero. You're working for your folks. I mean, they're never going to fire you, and so on. So even when these people come over, and a lot of them given quite nice jobs, they're only getting it through affirmative action, not because they have needed skills in the economy. So we've got out of every 100,000 immigrants that are brought over from these third world basket cases, I'm being generous here, possibly 5% of them have any useful skills. So the number of skilled, useful people that could even be used, let alone needed, that's another matter again, but let alone could be used or possibly used in the economy, we're looking at 5%. And even looking at government documents, if you're prepared to sort of dissect the obfuscation, and the obfuscation is plenty of that. If you're prepared to dissect that, you can sort of see that even the government, the government's own figures admit that there's a very tiny proportion of the immigrants brought in have any useful skills that can be employed to any productive purpose in the economy, but they still do it. They still bring out the same illiterate third world basket case peasants, no matter what. When all the information available to them shows that it's simply a drag and it's achieving nothing, it's creating social disharmony on a grand scale, they don't care. They just keep right on doing it because that's what the globalists are telling them to do. Now, there's a few things I sort of wanted to cover here in terms of what do all these people do? Now, there's a few statistics that are deeply concerning, I think. In Australia, the number of jobs that are at or below subsistence level, that is, the wages they pay are at or below subsistence level. The number of jobs, this is advertised jobs, by the way, like you've gone to the job boards and you start crunching the numbers, which takes a bit of time, but it can be done. And you look at that and you say, okay, the number of jobs that pay at or below subsistence wages are now in the decided majority. Like, we're not talking 50.01% in majority. We're talking 60% of the jobs are at or below subsistence level wages. This assumes a big city, by the way. This means that the only way you can live on those sort of wages is in communal living. You can't live any other way. Just to have enough to pay the rent on the one-bedroom apartment and to be able to take public transport to any work you might do, labouring or floor sweeping or anything like that. So there's been an explosion in the number of low-paid jobs in the economy. Jobs that are in, say, whether it's a takeout food shop or a floor sweeper or something, it doesn't matter. But there are jobs. There's been an explosion in the low-paid jobs, and there's an artificial sector of the economy, such as takeout food and some of the lower-priced restaurants, places that do manicuring and pedicuring and sort of entry level beautician type stuff, and some of the cheaper like hairdressing and so on. There's there's an entire section of the economy there that's where it's been determined that the wages must be minimum wages. It's not a market-driven sector of the economy at all. Now, that whole economic sector is non-viable. If they had to compete for labour and pay, proper wages, it would all be non-viable. So we've got, and we've seen a situation in the United States recently. I'll do another video on this one, but where people are being brought in by the people smuggling cartels, fully complicit with the NGOs, the United Nations, and indeed Western governments, to bring in cheap, in many cases, child labour, to bring in cheap labour into the West to do these dishwasher, if you like, type jobs. Now, this means that the entire sector of the economy is non-viable. If they had to pay the proper wages under the proper employment conditions, mandated by law, by the way. So eventually we've got Western governments who've got these employment laws they've instituted, then they actively work with the people smugglers and the NGOs to subvert the very laws they voted into existence. I mean, can you believe that? So this entire sector of the economy, which is vast, is not viable, or certainly not in its current form. Now, maybe it can be automated, or maybe it can better organisation or different tax structures, but at the moment it's only kept viable by bringing in peasant labour from the third world and simply not paying them the legally required amount. They get past it all sorts of sleazy means, like they say they're providing accommodation and food and medical care as part of the employment package, but in reality they're not doing that at all. The properties are all investment properties owned by the offshore investor that isn't paying any tax because they've used offshore funds to do it, and then there's management fees that are structured from offshore to ensure that no local tax is ever paid. There's no income tax paid by the employees because all their wages are below the threshold for tax, and so on. So it's a massive scam that's costing the Western economies billions in lost taxation revenue. But do you see it mentioned anywhere in the media? Everyone looks the other way and pretends it's not happening. So now the other thing I wanted to highlight here is that if we look at the advertising and the all the TV programs and things like that, they're really in the West, they're really pushing hard on this multiracial relationships. So every advert you see has the black man with the white woman, the kids have got the red hair, but they've got the afro haircut. And it's really only in the rural areas, in the rural townships, where you're going to see TV adverts, the local TV adverts, where the family is white anymore. You just don't see it. It's just not there. I mean, you've got to, in Sydney, you've got to look at an area that's 200 miles outside of Sydney before you start to see adverts with white people in it. In fucking Australia. That's the insanity. So they're really pushing it hard. They're really trying to push this multicultural thing hard, and also interracial marriages, and equally, by extension, interracial procreation. Now, okay, fine. Nobody wants that. No one's asking for it. So it's being pushed. It's being pushed on the white population. And the sort of underlying message is that if you're not in a multiracial relationship, as a white person, if you're not in a multiracial relationship, you're a fucking Nazi, Hitler, and so racist and bigot and da. Are the black and brown people bigoted by not wanting to marry white people? No, it's only one way. So now the reality is that the two biggest sections of the migrant population, Indians, Muslim, Pakistani, Bangladeshis, and Chinese, the biggest sections of the population, they're not interested in intermarrying. And again, even Indians in particular, easily far less than even 1% in integration or interracial marriage. Chinese a little bit more, but not very much. Even the Chinese that arrived in the gold rush days in the 1850s, the integration rate's about 20%. That's after 170 years. So in fact, it's not even 20%, but it's more than the Indian equivalent would be. But the integration rate just isn't there. There's now this idea that it must be because of white bigotry is absolute, utter, and total nonsense. The integration rate of the people coming here, because they're coming to the West in such vast numbers, they're forming vast ghettos. They've got permission to bring out relatives. They've got they're easily able to get, especially in the case of the Indians and the Pakistanis and so on, they're able to bring out husbands and brides from the home country and keep the home country attitudes and views and customs and habits burning bright in their new country. So they don't. There's no incentive for them actually to integrate. What incentive do the white people have? Well, I better integrate, otherwise people are going to run around calling me a Nazi, fascist, bigot, racist. I mean, is that the only incentive you're giving white people to intermarry with the masses of black and brown peasants that are coming to the West? I think maybe something a little bit more constructive than that needs to be thought of. And again, the people who are coming here in the masses, they're forming these massive ghettos, and they're encouraged to see the world here as multicultural. So they're encouraged to keep all their customs and habits from the old country. So what incentive do they have to intermarry? Well, none is the answer. So I don't see that happening. So his government, obviously, the Western government's trying very, very hard, and I don't think it's an effort actually to encourage intermarriage. I think it's an effort to demoralize the white population. These people are taking over your country, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. So there, and I think that's more what it's about. But let's assume it on face value that it is a desire to create interracial marriage and so on, and thus procreation. Then why would they bring out people and say you have to be multicultural? You don't have to integrate at all. You can live in ghettos with just your people around you. You can send back for brides and husbands to the home country. You don't have to integrate one little bit. And if any white person says you have to integrate, you just call them a fucking fascist Nazi, because that's what they are. So I don't know how you can create or foster or encourage interracial relationships, particularly at that personal level of marriage and procreation, with those sorts of attitudes. Now, the West, if the globalists had been serious about moving people just for economic reasons and nothing else, then they would have taken the view that integration was vital to the ongoing social cohesion and thus economic success of the regions. So they could have brought people out on the basis of, you're not going to be allowed to, for 10, 15 years, you can't have any welfare of any description, be it medical or any handout of any description. You can't bring out any relatives, no bringing out of parents and cousins and aunts and uncles, no sending back you must marry somebody who was born locally, and so on and so forth. If they'd done that, then social cohesion would have been possible. You can't live in a ghetto area with people from your country, and so on. They could have achieved, and also an immigration with a slower rate, if they'd focused on more cosmopolitan people who, say, were literate in the language and had internationally recognised qualifications. Then if they'd done all these things, then integration would have occurred. Maybe not at a breakneck pace, but it would have occurred, because there would have been a much larger pool of people, regardless of where they may have come from or their genetic origins. There would have been a larger pool of people who shared common values, and that's going to be the main thing that brings people together, be it in friendships or marriage or other things. So this, they could have done it if they wanted, but they chose not to, or chose, whether it's through sheer folly or stupidity or through treachery and intent to undermine all social cohesion, regardless of the reason for it. The globalists have ordered the Western governments to pursue immigration policies that have been and are the most likely to prevent social cohesion. And this is a vital consideration. Now, I just want to look at say in Australia's case, or even in the case of the United States, the sort of people who were emigrating to Australia in say the 1960s as a case in point. If you looked at any list of migrants, whether they were coming by plane or by ship or whatever, well, those would have been the two means. And you look at the lists of the occupations of the people. You've got carpenter, plumber, electrician, architect, nurse, all first world, qualifications. Nothing from the College of Ouagadougou or something. This is all first world qualifications, and those were the sort of people that were coming. It didn't mean that labourers weren't coming, but it meant that the proportion of skilled people was very high relative to the total migrant intake. So these were people that could literally walk off the plane or the boat straight into a job. Just pick up the newspaper for the jobs section, and they would have had a job in a week or two. So that was the sort of quality, if you like, of the people. Now, it's very different for the people coming in. So I'd like to sort of look at now with hundreds of thousands, say in Australia, hundreds of thousands of people coming in they're illiterate in English. They have no qualifications that are recognised. They're illiterate in their own language. They're simple, third world, basket case peasants. What do? Where do they go? There's just not the job vacancies here. We're told that they're needed for the economy, but there's just not the job vacancies here. I mean, the amount of people coming out each year, or being brought in rather, migrants being brought into Australia each year exceeds the amount of new jobs the economy creates at all levels. At all levels, it exceeds that. Now, sure, there's some casual jobs in the dishwashing type things. So maybe there's sort of if you like, the underground economy type jobs. Maybe those numbers are hard to pin down. But when you look at the amount of migrants coming in, and say there's the economy creates 270,000 new jobs in the year. That's again at all levels across the nation, but there are 300,000 migrants coming in. Now, coming in under various guises. Some are absolute migrants. Then there's the refugees. Then there's the people that are transitioning from students to citizenship, and you get all these various things. But the point is, there are more people coming in than there are jobs being created. So where do these people go? And what's the fucking point of bringing them out, or letting them come in? However you look at it. So coming back to that earlier statistic, the number of jobs that pay at or below subsistence level, so not average wage, but subsistence level, that's growing fast. As every year goes by, the amount of jobs of the total jobs in the nation, the amount of jobs there increases, and so we're looking at quite conceivably looking at a situation where there may only be 25% of the jobs even pay anything resembling a viable wage come the next 10 or 15 years. That's the extent of, on one side, the cost of living increase and the slowed growth of wages. But look, the people that are doing this to us, whether they're the globalists directly or just local political hack-goon sellouts, the treacherous sellouts to the globalists, they're living in areas that aren't affected by this. They're the entry level for these areas that, and these are people that generally agree with the mass migration. Yeah, what's wrong with that? Yeah, what are you, racist or a bigot? Yeah. So the entry level now is sort of 2.75 million, give or take, 2.5 to 2.75. That's entry level in these places. The nice tree-lined street, the nice schools, the clean area. There's no goons or gangs wandering around. Now, you may get the occasional super rich, Chinese, Communist Party general, or the Brahmin monopolist who's never paid tax in his life. You might get those sort of people living in there, but they keep to themselves. There's not, they don't have peasants from their own country traipsing in and out of the houses, so they don't disrupt the neighbourhood in terms of it's how quiet it is and so on. So they're almost fade into the woodwork, if you like. They're not really noticeable. So they're very clean and quiet streets. There's no, they look around, they look, what's the problem with all this migration? Doesn't affect me, and that's right, it doesn't. But you go 20 miles away to another part of Sydney and you don't see a single white face. You go, oh, okay, things are changing. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.